Hey, Chuck, how are you, my brother?
I'm doing great over here in Thurso, Quebec. How are you?
Thinking about a thing we did a couple of years ago.
That's at Asanapka.
Yeah, the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society. We're celebrating the Des Moines River. We went up there to talk about the importance of Asanop. It was a kind of a neat moment. Your grandfather, William Commanda, and Kirk Whipper, who sort of served the grandfather function in my life because I didn't have any grants in this country. We're friends, and strangely, decades later, the grandsons, as it were sitting on a stage remembering. What do you remember about that?
Well, what I remember most was the crowd. That would have been the first time I was involved in front of a large crowd like that. It felt really good because I didn't get nervous. Usually I get nervous and I know what I want to say, but I've come to the conclusion that if you practice what you want to say, it never comes out the way you thought it or you were thinking it. And so I just try to clear my mind and just speak on what I knew. And a lot of that had to do with canoe and then William and Asanatka. And it just flowed freely. And I guess maybe having you there made it all more comfortable.
Well, I want to talk about the work you're doing, and the term that sticks in my head is bark crusader. You're a bit like a superhero in my mind, in the sense that in your own quiet way, you're making the world a better place and you're bringing people together. Can you talk a little bit about Grandfather William and you, and maybe give some idea of how you came to be doing what you're doing right now? It's kind of an interesting story and maybe not quite what people might imagine.
Well, you'd have to go back to the early 70s. Let's see, there must have been about 12 grandchildren and all, maybe a little more, a little less. And we were all given the opportunity to learn. What I've found out at this moment in my life that it's not as easy as I thought it would be at this age to get out onto the land and harvest the material as it was maybe 10 years ago. And so what I remember then is I became the laborer, which at that time I didn't think it was fair. But in reality, I kind of miss those times. And I'm glad that I did pay attention. I'm glad that I was the one that was chosen. I don't know if they chose me or maybe it was just my ancestors, the ancestors and the spirits doing it for us. Out of all the grandchildren, I'm the one that picked it up. I didn't start off making canoes. I started off making baskets. Got to the point where I got so good at making them, ended up going to places like Washington, D.C., teaching the staff over there at the National Museum of the American Indian how to make baskets. And then at that point, they told us that we were being put up in the main section of the rotunda at the museum. So we were the main attraction. And that weekend there, after the basket workshop, we must have talked to 25, 30,000 people.
Wow.
Yeah, so not long after that, that's when I guess my grandfather he held those gatherings every summer on his property, and he invited me to come up, and he had something to ask. He wanted to know if I was interested in doing a canoe, and I says yeah, and then he says, well, my theme for this year is the watercraft. Because if you go back historically, every culture would have used a boat or watercraft in some form or another. And I said, sure, but I don't know where to get the material, Gramps. And then he went in the room and he came back out and he says, you go back to where you were harvesting root for baskets, which ended up being in the Gatineau Park. And lo and behold, must have passed there 12, 15 times. And then out of the blue, this huge birch tree appeared. And so we knew we weren't able to cut it down. So we took a ladder in there and then we peeled it standing. And we got our bark. Went back 5 years in a row after that, and the tree lived on. But what we've come to understand about big birch trees is, let's see, something 24-inch to 30-inch diameter. It's on its last leg, so it's going to die soon. And so the bark that we peeled must have been about a 24-inch diameter. And so we knew it was on its way out, but we still couldn't cut it down because we're in a strict conservation area in Gatineau Park. And so we climbed the ladder and we peeled it standing, but it did live on for another 5 years. before it died. And so I took that piece of bark up to my grandfather, and he was quite impressed. And I told him, well, I says, you didn't think I was paying attention when I was young, eh? He says, no. I says, well, I was. And then that kind of signified that I knew what I was kind of doing now. And when he came in oversaw that canoe that we were building, and he kind of gave his thumbs up, and that's when I realized now the student is no longer the student anymore, and the student has become the teacher. And so now the circle had become complete. All of a sudden, I got more into my spirituality side, and I kept smudging and putting tobacco down and wondering, am I doing the right thing here, spirits? And the message I got was, build them and they will come. Just like that movie, Field of Dreams. Build them and they'll come. And then the message that came with that is you build it with your Indigenous people that forgot that, due to residential school era, the 60s scoop and that kind of thing. And try and reintroduce the culture back to the people. And then by doing so, then we would begin again our role in the medicine wheel, where it told us that we'd become stewards of the land, and we'd want to take care of the land, and we'd be proactive in taking care of the land. I'm starting a canoe build on Monday, November 2nd, up in Chapleau, Ontario. Chapleau is a little town, and that's surrounded by 3 reserves. And then when I went up there in August to show them what to look for and how to prep it, they told me that the stats were very bleak as far as like suicide and crime and that kind of stuff. And the guy that's bringing me up there kind of told me that this canoe build is going to give them hope for the future, because the stats were really bad. It was 1 out of every 3 families went through suicide. 1 in 5 have experienced addictions, and that's not including the young. That would be the parents as well. When he asked me if I felt like coming back up after we peeled 2 huge birch trees, and he says, if you can come back up here and then we'll involve the whole community, he said that would give us hope for the future for our kids. This all made a lot of sense. And ironic enough, James, I got an email today about a Micmac woman, and she's a poet, and the gist of it was, as Indigenous people, we need these kind of crafts to be reintroduced into our communities. Maybe to lower the stats of the suicide rates and the addictions and the crime. That kind of confirmed all these years getting the messages from my ancestors from the spirit world, that what I'm doing for the benefit of the people as a whole.
Can you dig out that poem, Chuck, and read it for us?
Well, no, it's on the CBC. It's a CBC podcast. It's Q with Tom Power, and the poet is Rebecca Thomas. She talks about her experience, or her parents' experience with residential schools, and the way the culture was kind of stolen from us, how the languages were kind of beaten out of us. And then as a way to get that back into our communities was through the canoe.
Listen, when you talked about being with Grandfather William, I mean, it sounds like when you were a kid, you didn't really realize what your destiny was. And I'd love to know how many canoes you've built in places like the museum in Kingston and elsewhere, and you're on your way to Chapleau. But what would the first build be where you got a sense that this was something you should be doing for the foreseeable future?
To be perfectly honest, it would have been the second canoe. When my grandfather, he came in, he kind of blessed the canoe and he gave me the thumbs up. That was the canoe that he had asked me to build for his gathering. And that would have been my second one. The first one was okay, but it's almost like when you build something, the first one ain't the best, but then you build off of it. Whatever mistakes you made on the first one, then you pay attention to the second one. And so that would have been the most memorable, anyways. And I had spoken to a Cree elder around that time, and I asked them if what I was doing was worthwhile. And I says, I keep feeling that I'm coming up against a brick wall. And I'm banging my head on that brick wall. I'm wondering if this is what I should be doing. And his answer was, he says, that brick wall represents bureaucracy. You go around the brick wall and you do them. And he's the one that had told me that phrase there, build them and they will come. 2008, 2009. Yeah, the problem with that, no, James, is that first canoe I built, my grandfather had given me that bark. I had it in storage for 6 years. He had it in storage for 15 years. So that bark was 21 years in storage. And that bark, it was supposed to be made in Eskasoni on Cape Breton Island way back in 2000. And no, actually it was 1999. Things don't always go the way you want them to. And so I put that bark away, and it survived the house fire. I was 21 years old. And then when I had to build that canoe, I put it in a rain barrel for 7 days. And when I unrolled it, it was just like it came off the tree yesterday. Yeah. And so that was the first one. Unfortunately, I couldn't stick around for the launch on that one. So I don't know if it leaked or not.
Where was that first build?
That would have been just south or north of Winnipeg, in Fort Alexander.
Okay, and you took the bark with you to that build?
Yes.
Loaded up the truck and away you went?
Yes, that was my first one. And at that point, then if I wanted to continue doing that, I wasn't familiar with the area, like Algonquin Park. And so I didn't know where to get bark. And then all of a sudden people start asking you, can you come and do canoe here? Can you come and do canoe with us? And I said, yeah, but that's all dependent on if I can get the bark or not. And then all of a sudden I started running into people like Golden Lake, Steve Hunter, who were very familiar with Algonquin Park area. And then through me and them, we started working with the ministry, and the ministry was very helpful in the sense that when there was a prescribed cut, especially in Algonquin Park, the tree marker would go in. If he came across a birch, he painted a certain color, telling the machine not to touch that. And in some cases, they put Algonquin, the word Algonquin on the bark. And so now when they did that, then they GPS the coordinates, and then they put those coordinates on the map, and then they'd send them to us. If you can imagine, without those coordinates, we'd be riding around aimlessly, just by chance come up upon a birch. But now with these coordinates, you'd get on the logging roads, you'd get as close as you can to it, and then you'd walk in. And lo and behold, I think every second coordinate canoe birch was harvested.
And are you still able to use that? But you've had more builds than you can get domestic bark for. You've had to reach elsewhere for bark, haven't you?
Yes. I Googled to purchase Birchbark online.
Yeah, as you do these days. Yeah.
Yeah. So I found a contact in Spokane, Washington, and oddly enough, this gentleman, John Lindman, he learned how to make canoes through David Gidmark.
Really? Who learned to make them at Kitigan Zibi?
Yeah, but he didn't. Gidmark went to Wisconsin, and then he did a mini canoe workshop or model canoes. And I'm not sure if they participated in a full-size one, but John says he learned his canoe making skills from David Gidmark.
The other guy, where's he getting his bark?
Well, he's getting his bark from a little bit from Alaska and a little bit from Siberia. So some of the bark, like the one I used for Mary, that was from Siberia. Yeah.
So tell me about the Kingston build.
Well, I met Mary last year at Murphy's Point, and then she asked me if I was interested in coming to do canoe build in Kingston. And she presented her idea, and then we'd have so much involvement with the schools, the prison, Indigenous youth. And then I told her, well, if you can get the funding together, unfortunately, this has become my bread and butter now. And if I don't make a living with it, then I don't eat, and I don't, you get my point anyways. So by the end of November or December now, she said that she had secured funding, and I think we had settled on April. The problem with that now, James, is April is not a good month to peel bark. It was still not getting the right temperatures. So this is when it hit me that I have that contact in Washington. So I'll send him out an email, see if he can help me out. And sure enough, he did. And then all of a sudden COVID hit. So now the April bill got postponed till September. And so, yeah, so first thing you know, I'm down there September 8th. I mean, it's one of the nicer looking canoes.
Being there, Chuck, I'm always amazed at how you work. You're not a preacher and on a stump telling people that First Nations interests are matter. You're just there doing your thing. So I got a couple I got lots of questions about that. One of them is technical. Okay, it's pretty exacting work to make a bark canoe.
Right.
And and you're kind of the master conductor there, and you've got people who've never picked up a crooked knife, and somehow you make them feel good about doing what they're doing as rank amateurs, and also somehow you manage to build a canoe out of I would guess parts that if you made them all yourself would be much more, let's call it technically refined. How do you do that?
First, I want to address what you had said about me being all gung ho and anal about the indigenous culture this, indigenous culture that. Growing up with my grandparents, especially with my grandfather being the carrier of that Seven Fires Prophecy wampum belt, it talked. I mean, I heard it so many times. I mean, it's literally burned in my core, and it tells of a time that we're to come together as people, and you can't deny, let's say, a non-Indigenous person his eagerness to want to try, even if it's for 5 minutes. So I involve everybody. I mean, that's what the prophecies tell us, that we're to come together as one, and this would be one of the best ways to reconcile between cultures, reconcile within ourselves, reconcile, with just about anything, everything, Mother Nature, Mother Earth. One thing I've come to understand is when I involve people, I want to give them that sense of, okay, we're going to split route today. I want you to give it a shot. Take your time, and this is how we do it. I sit there with them. I'll do one, they'll do one. And one thing I've learned is never discourage them, even if it's not right. And then you let them install it. Before, what I do is I wait till everybody's gone home, and then I would take that apart and I'd reattach it. Let's say a lashing. But now I've come to the conclusion that, well, wait now, maybe it doesn't look like 100% like the way it should, but that person, now he can pretty well point out at any point during the canoe build, I did that. Or, and this canoe build here, there was more women involved. Well, that's another thing that we've come to understand about canoe building, is it was a male and a female thing. And you needed that balance in life, right? And then what we only read about it, but then you start seeing pictures, especially like my grandparents, my great grandparents, my grandmother's parents. You see like him and then him and his wife, and then you get pictures of him and his wife and the kids. And that just made a lot of sense. And then when a young man and a young woman, they met up for marriage or matrimony, they both possess that knowledge. So they're coming into the union, both possessing that knowledge. So all of a sudden it's okay. Now the young man, before he met his wife, was making canoes. And she was probably participating on canoe builds with her family. And now they're doing them together. Now they're doing them together with their kids. And it just so happened that this canoe builder was more women than men. And so I each gave them a shot. I'm not going to deny them that they're, like I said, their eagerness to want to try and install. And I mean, it's not perfect, but there's enough perfectness beside theirs. Besides, we're not looking for perfect. Nobody was perfect.
I have to marvel that somehow it has two pointy ends and an open side on the top and it floats. I mean, it's looking at, I mean, I've seen you in a bunch of builds, and looking at sort of mid build, you think, oh, I don't know.
Well, there are a couple of moments like that, but it all works out in the end.
Yeah, it does.
I can't explain it. Maybe it's the spirits who work through me, because when I come into a build, I put my tobacco down and I smudge, and I ask my ancestors to come and work through me. and if it's them that are doing this, then hey, power to them. I accept a little bit of the of the glory, but most of the credit goes to them. And then that's part of those 7 sacred teachings again.
I mean, it's a very powerful show don't tell moment for me. I mean, it's not like you're lecturing people about humility. You're actually demonstrating that. But so since 2008, where have you been and how many of these canoes have you made? I know you've been in St. Catharines. I know you've been in Peterborough at the Canoe Museum. Where else have you been and how many canoes have you made?
Well, at the beginning, it started real slow, right? But as time went on, it picked up. And so I'd say now on the average, I was doing maybe 4 a summer, and that would be about 12 years now. So I'm close to 50. My furthest build was in Manitoba, mostly centered around Ontario, central Ontario, southwestern Ontario. A lot of them in Bancroft area. I would like to get more contracts in Quebec, because the Algonquin, the Anishinaabe people, we span on this side of the border as well. And perhaps more of our territory was on this side of the river. See, I live, if you're familiar with Ottawa, and then you go through Orleans on Old Highway 17, you come to the ferry there in Cumberland. But if you keep going past that, and then you come to a little town of Rockland, well, on the other side of Rockland is another ferry. And that only operates seasonal. But if you take that ferry and where you get off in Thurso is on my street. But as soon as you get off the ferry, they've got what they call a national park. And that's supposed to be one of the, on this side anyways, it's one of the biggest conservation parks in the area. And so I approached them for a canoe build there for next summer, and they're deciding what they want to do. That would give us more of a presence over here too, right? I can talk about the Algonquin history, because I mean, it is Algonquin territory, right?
You work with the Mary Farrars in Kingston. You work with a group or a leader. I mean, everybody makes their own sort of sense of what you're doing, and you hear the story that they wrap around the work you're doing. Has anybody ever sort of gone too far in one direction, or do you guide the group in helping to frame or contextualize or understand what it is you're trying to do?
A few times it happened, but now what I've learned is to nip that in the butt as soon as it happens. Keep around that central role, or that central message, that the ancestors tell me. And I find, like, getting back to when we did that canoe trip, that the conversation was around reconciliation, and the canoe being such an iconic symbol of what it is to be Canadian. There's no better way of messaging or putting the message out that this would be a great form of reconciliation. It's not only reconciling between cultures, which is usually the main part of it, but it's, I mean, reconciling with yourself, reconciling with what the damage that we've done to Mother Earth, even if we didn't do it personally. As human beings, we're aware. We watch our neighbor or the person sitting next to us throw his litter on the ground, and then we don't do anything about it. So when it does happen, I won't single out anyone in particular. I'll do it in private.
When we met, it was at the Kingston Rowing Club, and you'd kindly agreed to come along on Connected by Canoe, and it was you made a huge contribution to that trip. You mentioned at the time to me, I think it might have been privately, but that you had become a pipe carrier.
Yes, that's correct.
You were kind of a reluctant pipe carrier. So that was May of 2017, and we're 2 years, 3 years, 2.5 years past that. You seem more comfortable with your leadership role as an Anishinaabe tradition carrier, canoe builder than you were then. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's very fair to say. But it comes back to talking about things I'm comfortable with, and I'm very comfortable talking about what I do. And then I hear my grandfather. I can hear his voice in my head. All those years growing up, and then hearing about the wampum belt story, and how we got to come together under the seventh fire as one people, to protect Mother Earth. And that's just the way it's turned out. I mean, I don't see myself as a leader. Maybe that's why it seems to be working. My experience though, going down that red path or red road, is the ones that seem to push that away. They don't feel like they're worthy of that, are the ones that usually are the most fitted for those roles. Getting back to the pipe, I really didn't want to accept that pipe.
Did you
I
accept
didn't
that,
feel,
excuse me, from William, your grandfather?
no, the pipe was given to me by an apprentice or a student of Williams. Yeah, and his name was Paul Boisvert. And the stories that Paul shared with us, especially in the sweat lodge, were pretty amazing. I guess he had got sober through the his teachings. Once he was sober, I guess you need something that's going to keep your mind occupied. And then he was given a pipe by my grandfather. And it's oddly enough, that pipe that he holds today was the pipe that my grandfather had given Pierre Trudeau back in the 70s. I don't know how we as Algonquin people from Kitigan Zibi managed to get that pipe back. And then he presented that pipe to Paul. And Paul was to continue down a path, but Paul was the same way. He didn't want that pipe. He felt he wasn't worthy of it. And then now the more he resisted, the more it came at him. And so I haven't seen Paul for quite a while now. And last I heard, he goes to the island. We're not allowed on Victoria Island anymore. So I think Bait Island, which is further up or west of Victoria Island. He goes there,
Yeah.
and sometimes he'll go to Connaught Rifle Range and he'll smoke the pipe there. And so he shared some of his stories, and they were pretty amazing. And he's the one that came up with the idea of presenting me with a pipe.
And meanwhile, you're loading up the truck and driving to Chapleau.
Yeah. Well, if
Just
I
in
had
time for the first big snowstorm of the year.
yeah.
Just to wind up, I want to come back to the Kingston bill. If you were to sort of put in a few sentences the message of that exercise, what is it?
And don't give up on your dreams. I mean, this was just a dream when I met Mary, and then this pandemic hit, and then we kept plugging along, her and I, and we kept the dream alive. And then through that dream, by keeping it alive, I mean, we had two women that actually came out and then expressed their Indigenous blood. One was a 15-year-old and her mother was, I don't know, 40, 45, 50. And they were so ashamed and they were afraid to talk about their Indigenous ancestry. The mother would talk about how her father told them to hide that. Otherwise, they'd be shamed and then ridiculed and maybe in some cases beat up or whatever the case was. And so she passed that on to her kids. And then all of a sudden now we got these through the dream, and don't give up. We got these people that are coming out and they're actually proud of announcing that they're Indigenous ancestry.
Listen,
Yeah.
when you said that you would become part of the National Council at the Canadian Canoe Museum, I was absolutely delighted. Everybody at the museum was. The work that you're doing, Chuck, is incredibly important, and I really just, on behalf of the museum and our people, our members and our volunteers, want to say that we really love what you do, and we're proud of what you do, and we're inspired by what you do. I don't know if anybody's doing anything quite the way you are, and I really want to commend you for doing that.
I, for one, I'm trying to take the messages that I'm receiving from my ancestors and applying them, and then knowing that my grandfather was the wampum belt keeper, and then taking those messages that he talk about all the time, and then applying them to now. And once again, as I'm not ramming anything down anybody's throat. I mean, you have a mind of your own. You just take it with a grain of salt. If you want to apply it to your personal life, that's fine. If not, that's fine. I'm proud to be connected with the Canoe Museum. And that's what I wanted to tell you is if at any time there's anything I can do, whether that's to help fundraise, put in a good word. I didn't know Kirk very long, but when I did meet him, it seems like we connected, not on a face-to-face level. It was something deeper, on a spiritual level, I guess. I feel like it would be part of my responsibility to make sure that this especially the new museum, I want to see it built. I want to see it built because I want all the collection that the museum has put on display.
Well, we share that goal. You're a very generous man, though, Chuck, and I do want to say thank you. And so, if Chapleau is the kind of closing out of 2020, the year of the pandemic, what's ahead? Have you got stuff on your calendar for 21?
Oh God! So all the canoes that were postponed were mainly school builds. So now they've all chosen next spring. So now, if I go into my schedule, I have about 6 canoe builds beginning the end of February, right till the end of school, which would be around the 30th of June. And so I'd have to fit in 6 canoe builds, and I'm going, holy cow, Creator, thank you, but help me figure out how I'm going to fit this all in, because I find when I'm in a school setting, what better way to talk about what we've been talking about to these young minds. And I've come to the conclusion as well as you never know that you might be speaking to the next prime minister. You might be speaking to the next environmental minister. So it's important that we pass on this knowledge, these teachings, to, once again, all cultures. And then they take that home, and then if they hear something negative at home, well, no, this is what I've learned today over here based on this. And usually it's based around the canoe. And I'll share you a little story. Is I did a canoe build in Barrhaven, and one of the young lads that took a real interest, he was a non-Indigenous kid, and him and the principal, they were steady button heads. And when this young fella decided he wanted to come to the canoe build every day, well, he connected with the principal, because the principal was an avid canoeer. So now, instead of button heads, they had something that they can share together. And this I found was so amazing. The principal was so blown away, and he couldn't believe something as simple as a canoe build, would help this one kid. And so once again, in that school, I had maybe 3-4 kids that were afraid or were ashamed to self-identify. And then all of a sudden, because they're participating on this, and then this was getting so much attention, and then all of a sudden that sense of pride started coming out of them, and then say, hey, I participated in that. But I remember my great-great-grandparents or my grandparents talking about this, maybe even building their own. And so that made it all worthwhile. The summer is always donated to someone else, like a Mary Murphy's Point. If I can get a canoe built here at this park, that's fantastic. There's always Stephen in Bancroft that brings the town together. And there was even talk of maybe going up to a camp for young people.
Well, if you need an extra hand with that, you better give me a call.
I certainly will. So, okay, well, I'm serious, and I can always use a good hand.
Listen, it's been great chatting with you, Chuck, and I'll stay tuned. It's amazing watching you work in the way that you do, and I see the dog is still very much a part of your life.
Yep.
What's the dog's name?
Yogi.
Just to finish up, Chuck, Chapleau, you mentioned 3 First Nations right around the town there.
Yeah.
Who's sponsoring that? And it sounds like it's almost as much for the not so much for the sort of non-Indigenous community as it is for the Indigenous community up there.
Well, it's a gentleman named David Flood, and David is from an Ojibwe community near North Bay. Now, he got hired by the chief and council of these 3 reserves to kind of come up with some kind of a management plan for the forest, and in which they'd be more proactive in the decision making concerning their traditional lands. Yeah, so he's working so hard and trying to get some kind of management plan and bring back that role that we had in the medicine wheel, where we're stewards of the land. We should have a say too. And then we harvested bark, and what I found there is they took everything except the birch, and so now the birch is exposed to the elements, and then the bark became very brittle.
Yeah, and those trees are going to die. They don't like the sun.
They don't like the sun, and so we managed to harvest 2 birches, 2 rolls. Now, what happened? I was supposed to do it in the basement of their band office. Now, because the COVID numbers they rose in Quebec, they didn't want anybody from Quebec up there, and so now we're scrambling because David already gave his deposit. They're scrambling around. Where can we do this? Where can we do this? And then I says, well, who's funding this? I am, he says. I said, well, does that stop you from getting a place in town? I said, the ones that want to come off the reserve can come and they can participate. We can have the townspeople come by and participate. It's open to everybody. And he says, yeah, we can do that. And so now I'm building it in curling section of the arena in Chapleau.
People will be yelling, hurry hard, Chuck, hurry hard, hurry.
We want to see that canoe underwater before the ice freezes. Well, that's another thing that's that they're going to have to realize now. Everything's going to be frozen. So the best case scenario for me is gum it, dump water inside until there's no more leaks. Now, it's not leaking. I got to go now. I can't test it. I'm not going to paddle it on ice.
I look forward to hearing the story of that. I'm sure it'll be good. It's great of you to take the time, and I look forward to next time we can have a cup of tea together, and we'll see you soon, and say hi to Yogi for us, and be good.
Yeah, well, if you're in Ottawa there after my canoe build, let me know and we'll meet up somewhere.
Sounds great, Chuck. Good night,
Well,
my friend.
thanks for thinking of me.
Great to see you.
Take care now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.